It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be with you virtually today from Toronto. My university is in Syracuse, but for the last couple of years I live in Toronto, Canada. They are only 4 hours away across the lake, Ontario Lake. I think it was really a bad idea to announce about tomorrow's party on the beach and to give some information about it. My feeling right now is increasing, and this might affect my performance in this presentation. I envy you guys. I always consider South Africa home away from home for me, and I always love to go back to Cape Town and to other places. In any case, I hope that we will get another chance to do that. I just want to check, can you hear me, please?
Yes. Very well.
Yes.
Clear.
Yes.
Very well.
Everyone can hear you.
Just to assure you that
everyone can hear me. Oh, wonderful. I just wanted to check. So, my name is Raed, Sharif, and quickly I'll just give you a background. I teach at Syracuse University, and I'm also finishing my PhD right now there. And I do independent consultancy in areas related to public policy, information access, and innovation. Also international development, mainly focused on developing countries where I originally come from. I originally come from Palestine, and I've been living in North America for almost 10 years now. Today I'm co-authoring this presentation with Paul Euler, who's the director of the Board on Research, Data and Information at the National Academies in the United States. And by the way, Paul is the author of the document, the UNESCO Policy Guidelines document that I'm going to give you an overview about today. Both Paul and myself, we have been working in this area for many years, and we're happy to be with you today and share our knowledge and experience. So briefly, what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes or so is to give you a brief overview about the UNESCO guidelines regarding policy and government information practices. And at one point, I'll try to link it to my own research that I did in South Africa a couple of years ago for my dissertation, where I basically focused on access to government information and utilization in terms of obstacles, opportunities, quality, and other things. So without further ado, I'll get to my presentation, and if someone helps me to go to the next slide, please. Before I get into specifics about the UNESCO guidelines, I would like to give you a general overview about it. But before that, I would like to point out that the document itself, which is about 35 pages, can be found on this URL, the link that I'm providing. It's a very interesting document. It's easier to read, and it addresses many issues that I might not be able to cover in this presentation. So I really encourage you to go and to read it if you have time. Now, to the guidelines themselves, basically the guidelines are an advisory tool for governments, basically to advise them on issues related to what kind of policies and practices they can have in relation to access to information, government information, public domain information, taking into consideration national needs and international practices, and also national concerns and issues. The guidelines emphasize the importance of this information, and I would like also to emphasize the importance of this information. One of the things that I always say about this kind of information in the North, or in the United States, or Canada, or Europe, can add value to the society. I believe in Africa and the Middle East and other developing countries, this information can create value and can save lives. So I would like to emphasize this point. It also provides detailed information about what kind of benefits can be derived from this information that I'll go through today. The guidelines also encourage governments to play a more active role, a leading role in this area, and it specifies different approaches that you can think about. But basically, governments should be active in defining the scope of available information. And again, the exception should be the classification of information or the restrictions on information. But by default, most of government information should be placed on the public domain for the benefit of the society. The document also encourages governments to be very active in adopting national freedom of information. And I'm really happy and congratulate Nigeria for their achievement in this regard. So far, we have almost 80 to 85 countries around the world who have this freedom of information act. Unfortunately, in some countries, it's only that is on paper, and we would like to see more implementation and enforcement of this law and act in the future. The guidelines also, in case governments decide to put some restrictions on some information, it also provides a kind of approach or a model where you can have this restriction, but at the same time allow for some access to your information. Next slide, please. So the guidelines are basically all about transparency, participation, and collaboration. And the concept that I would like you to pay more attention to and to keep in mind is the concept of openness. And I think the concept of openness is very important. And the document here, or the guidelines, and many other initiatives and documents in this area, they promote this concept. The guidelines favor universal over restricted access to information and knowledge. This is obvious from the guidelines. It also favors universal over restricted participation. It's a big issue right now in many countries around the world, the issue of participation. A lot of things happening in governments. I can give examples from Mexico and other places where they involve their citizens in many decisions that governments are making, from budgeting to other areas of public policy. They are using this concept. The guidelines also favor collaboration over centralized production, and I'll be giving more details about this in a minute. Next slide, please. But before I get to the details, some people can come and say, but what exactly do you mean by public domain information? Or in some other literature, they call it public sector information. Let me give just an easy answer for this. If you're talking about public sector, information that is produced by government agencies or for government agencies using a third party, but they're using public money for that, by default it should be placed on public domain unless it is restricted in some way because of national security concerns or personal privacy concerns, like in case of health information. This information will have some classification or restrictions. But again, by default, if it doesn't have this restriction, it should be placed in the public domain. On the other hand, if we are talking about private information, the opposite is correct here. Most of the private information is restricted by one copyright or intellectual property law or another. But in some cases, we have private information that is placed in the public domain. Examples are private information that has already protection, and this protection is expiring after some years. Some other private information that is placed in the public domain can be new information, but the owner of or the author of this information decided to use an alternative licensing approach, such as Creative Commons or other approaches, where you can maintain your rights on it, but at the same time you can make it openly available for others. Next slide, please. The second question that sometimes we have about this area, so why this is important and why this is important right now. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on this slide. Everybody in the room, this distinguished panel and audience, would know that in the last 40 or 50 years, but in particular in the last 10 or 20 years, because of the internet and digital networks, we have witnessed a dramatic change, a shift, a paradigm shift between the print and digital network eras, where we were basically limited in the way we produce and manage and disseminate information, with costs being very high and with things being centralized, to an era where now things are much cheaper and it's much easier to produce information and manage it. I'm sure all of you hear from time to time some estimates, like, for example, what we produce in a couple of days in information is much. Sorry, I keep hearing an echo. Yeah, it's fine now, sorry. It's much more than what we have produced in the first like 2,000 or 3,000 years of information. So it is really important now because we are able to disseminate information, because we are able to use it. It becomes very important for us to maximize the value of every single. And when it comes to government information, there's no difference. And by the way, in many places, governments are the biggest single producer of information. So we are talking of assets that can be utilized for social and economic development. Next slide, please. So this slide is just like a visualization of what are the kinds of benefits that we can derive from public domain information, placing it online, freely available. I will go into details, so I can skip this slide and go to the next one. Again, two concepts I would like to emphasize in this area is the concepts of empowerment and innovation, which are very important for building and sustaining knowledge societies around the world. If you think about it, when enough people like ourselves or others around the world get around information, they collect it, use it, manage it, distribute it in a way or another, through digital networks, of course. Those are new ways, sometimes surprisingly innovative. They create new ways to solve problems, they create new enterprises around it, new communities and new opportunities. And these knowledge-driven potential. If someone can help me with this, probably you should move the mic a little bit away from the computer. Yeah, that's good. I'm sorry to do that. So, yeah, these knowledge-driven potentials are designed mainly, to offer new and innovative ways to solve old problems, but at the same time, they offer new ways to move forward. And moving forward is very important for everybody. This movement or this, let's say, approach is characterized by increased coordination and collaboration. We need that. We also need more of user-generated content and involvement in the production of information. But also I would like to emphasize this last point. We need increased user-driven innovation. It's no longer the case where we have experts or consultants coming and deciding what is good for local communities and what is not good. We should always aim for having locals have a say in these innovations, and they say, well, this is our situation, these are our circumstances, and this is the solution that we believe that can work for us. So this is a very important point to keep in mind. Next slide, please. Governments come usually and say, okay, we want to listen to this. We would like to make our information together. What is it? What is this approach for us? What are the benefits and values? There are a lot of them. I summarized them in those 3 bullets here, but believe me, there's a lot of literature about this. From efficiency and effectiveness point of view, if you have your information openly available online and all your agencies and servants and employees can see it, basically you can avoid duplication of effort and time. You can learn from other agencies best practices. You can learn about their problems and avoid them. And at the same time, it makes your work more transparent and efficient. The second point is about money. It's about deriving some financial gain from this. The direct financial issue, and I don't want to spend time on it. It's basically if you decide to sell your information for whatever reason. But let me some indirect. If you make your information more, this means that more private sector companies, like what I will talk about in the next slide, they can be innovative, they add value to it, and then you have expansion in your businesses, you have more ideas coming, and you have more startup companies. They hire more people, you give them salaries, and they pay taxes. So these taxes go back to the government. So this is the indirect financial gain that can be derived, and some other ways, of course, but this is basically it. The last point is about promoting democratic values. If you make your information